This episode is sponsored by USA Girl Scouts Overseas. For families on the move, Girl Scouts is a constant, allowing girls to pick up right where they left off, benefiting from the single best leadership development experience for girls in the world. Their virtual troop is a great way for girls to learn new skills, meet girls from all over the world, and have fun no matter where they are or where they move. You can learn more at usagso.org. USA Girl Scouts Overseas. Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. I'm your host, Jen McDonald, and I was a military spouse for nearly 30 years until my husband's retirement. I'm now the mom of 4 young adults, including 1 active duty son. I also wrote the book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. Through my experiences, I came to believe that we're only stronger together. Whatever life is throwing your way as a military spouse, let's talk about it. So hello, and welcome to today's episode. This is Jen, and I am so glad you're joining me today. I am talking to Jen Pasquale from Pride and Grit. It's a resource for seasoned spouses. And it's one of those things I really wish had been around at the end of my husband's career, because as you get further along in military life, it can be a little bit lonely and you may feel less inclined to seek out help because you feel like you have to have it all together. So we talk about all of that, what Pride and Grit offers, and some insight for seasoned military spouses. So if you are a seasoned or salty spouse, this is the episode for you. And if you're not, it is so good to prepare for those years before they hit. So if you think your spouse is going to be in for any length of time, you can still get some great tips about self-care and finding your strength and ways to set yourself up for the long haul as a military spouse of somebody that's in it for their career. But before we get to that talk, today I wanted to mention, here is one of my favorite things for this week, Jen's favorite things. So Military Spouse Advocacy Network is launching their 2nd annual Military Spouse Leadership Development Program. So the applications are open for this until June 10th, coming up quick. So you want to make sure, click the link in the show notes and register for this. And it's completely free, and you will learn from various industry leaders in partnership with Harvard University's National Preparedness Leadership Initiatives. It is open to all spouses, including reserves, Guard, post 9/11, Gold Star spouses, caregivers, and spouses of veterans and retirees. This is a fully virtual, free online course in which you can receive a leadership certificate and micro-certifications in mental health allyship from Psych Hub. Go to militaryspouseadvocacynetwork.org and look for their leadership development program for 2022. Okay, so switching gears here, if you are a military homeschooler or you have thought about it, check out the brand new Military Homeschool podcast by Crystal Nyhoff, who used to be part of Army Wife Network. She has started this new show, and the really cool thing is I'm going to be on it at the end of June or beginning of July. I just finished an interview with her, got to talk about our family's homeschooling experience. And I'll be sharing that on social media, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, there are several episodes out, and it is a podcast just for military homeschoolers. It's supporting, bringing guests on, giving you lots of information. So even if you've just thought about it, like I said, go take a listen and get some great input and insight and encouragement for your homeschooling journey. As always, it helps so much if you rate and review the show and share it with somebody else who could use it too. There's always a way to share it, whatever podcast player you're using, and I appreciate that so much. Let's get into my talk with Jen from Pride and Grit. Thanks for listening. So, hey everybody. Today, I am so excited to be talking to Jennifer Pasquale from Pride and Grit. Jen is a 15-year active duty Army spouse, a mother of 2, and a champion for seasoned military spouses. In 2018, she founded Pride and Grit as a support community resource hub, and as of 2021, host of an annual personal development retreat for seasoned military spouses. As a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach, Jen also offers identity coaching, using the CliftonStrengths assessment. As a coach, Jen helps spouses develop pride in their unique talents while cultivating the grit to use those talents and lean into an identity beyond service. You can connect with Jen and Pride and Grit in all the places, prideandgrit.com, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I will share all of those links in the show notes so that you can connect with her. So welcome, Jen. It's so good to be talking to you today.
Likewise. I've been looking forward to this, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, I want to hear all about it. And we had some technical issues setting up, which seems to be par for the course. So we got through. Here we are.
We are tenacious.
So I'm really excited to hear about Pride and Grit and how that all came about and all the great things you're doing. But first, if you want to share a little bit about yourself and your military spouse and family background.
Yeah. So so as you mentioned, I've been married. It'll be 16 years this year. So currently in the 15-year mark, to my husband, and we have two teenagers, 14-year-old and 12-year-old, and we're currently stationed in the DC area and are hoping to and intending to stay here through their schooling. So we are planting, somewhat of a root, which is a little it's exciting, but it's also like, oh, really? This is it.
Yeah.
So it's exciting though for the kids. So that's kind of the season that we're in as a family. And it's nice. It's different. It's a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. They're so independent. And then you go, wow, look all this time I have.
Yes. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you definitely are, I'm going to say ministering, but you are helping and encouraging seasoned military spouses. So tell us about how the passion for that came about for you.
Yeah. So that story really goes back to 2016. So in 2016, and I've told this in a couple of different places before, but in 2016, we had a miscarriage, and it was kind of a traumatic experience on multiple levels, right? Obviously it's hard, for anyone. What I found particularly challenging was that my husband was in sort of a senior leader role, and I was sort of in a senior leader spouse role, if you will, in terms of helping organize things to support other spouses. And what I struggled with was sort of being the person that needed help and understanding how to do that. And so I didn't. Like, the reality is I didn't ask for help. I didn't tell anybody. I kept it very sort of quiet. And I tried to really heal sort of in a vacuum and in silence. And it was, there was a few friends that knew, but generally speaking, it wasn't something that was sort of public. And if I could do it all over again, there's no question I would do it differently, but I just didn't know how at the time to be the helper and the helped. And so I chose to be the helper instead. And I chose to kind of bury those needs. And so what happened as I came out of that season was I sort of turned around and watched my peers, and I realized we were all doing the same thing. Maybe they didn't have the same story I had, but they had challenges, and they didn't necessarily feel like there was the space to, not be okay, and the space to be having a hard time with the schedule or with the demands or with the op tempo or with the life, because, many of us were in the 12-year mark or more, 12 to 15. And so a lot of us have been around a long time, and we had weathered a lot of really hard years in military life. And so a lot of us were tired. It wasn't that we didn't, still love being a service family, but we were tired. And I just noticed people they didn't have a space to be tired that was okay, that was supportive for them. And so that's kind of where Pride and Grit came from. It was really just wanting to start telling those stories and telling them in a way that was honest, and a way that was vulnerable, in a way that gave people permission to say, I don't want to change anything, but I am having a hard time. And I am struggling to be, what I think I'm supposed to be, as opposed to just who I need to be right now, which is just, owning the season that I'm in. And if that means I can't do as much, then I don't do as much.
Right.
And so I think that was where it all started. And then because of that, it just over time really evolved into this niche of seasoned spouses and spouses of transitioning service members. because those are frankly, like, those are my people, right? That's the season I'm in and have been in for a while. And so I know at least I know some of those struggles that they may have. And it makes it easier to design programming when it's like, it's already something
what you're living.
right. It's like, oh
Yeah.
I need that, if nothing else, I'm designing programming for myself. But yeah, that's kind of how it all came about, was really this hardship and the learning of that hardship and sort of living through that, healing through that. Being on the other side of that just gave me such a different perspective. And I just felt like, man, I really want to figure out how to create the space for what I thought was needed. And I felt wasn't, I guess, really needed, or not really needed. I guess it wasn't. There's so many programs for new spouses or deployed spouses, right, or, kind of pick your category. I just wasn't finding anything that was really hyper focused on sort of the tired folks that had been around the block a few times.
Oh yeah. Well, it definitely resonates with me. I'm just thinking back to some memories of different times where I think one of the things is that saying, like, it's lonely at the top. It sounds really cliche, but it's so true, because you look around and you go, the people I could go to, what if they're in my husband's chain or spouse's chain of command, or they're, his boss or whatever, they may not be the folks that you would go to. But I found that those were the ones that really checked on me and were there for me. When we were in Germany, my husband went to Afghanistan for a year, and the general he was working for, they moved, and she was the only person to check on me for that year. She called me every month without fail. And I just look back at those times and I think it's so important what you're doing. And another one was when my husband deployed to Iraq way back in the day. He and the squadron commander, and he was in leadership, they both left. And so me and his spouse were making sure to set up the phone tree,
Right.
And
course.
We had a list of spouses we were checking on every week. And I had 4 little kids and she had 4 little kids, and I was homeschooling. And we looked at each other. We had this moment. We went, who's checking on us? Nobody who's checking. So we came up with a little thing of, you're off one week and I'm on, and we'll switch off. I will do all the checks and take all the calls. And then the next week it's and then I'd call her and she'd call me. I put her on the list. How are you doing? Do you need anything? And so I think there's a lot of inventiveness and creativity. It sounds like you definitely have that, but I agree. I just think unless you happen to come across people like that, you are very lonely and kind of maybe afraid to admit you're struggling or could use help, or, people's marriages are falling apart. There's all sorts of things that I've seen. My husband was in for 31 years. Yeah. As you're saying all that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that had been around when he got out in 2017. So it's right around the time you're kind of gearing up.
Well, and I'll tell you, like, one of the other things that happened during that kind of time when this whole idea sort of started to form for me was this was probably 6 to 9 months after sort of my own challenges. There was a spouse, in our neighborhood that, had attempted suicide. And for me, that was this sort of wake up call that there is no, that kind of challenge is universal, right? That can right. happen to anyone. Anyone can.
No one's immune. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, no one's immune from it. And that was just really an eye opener for me because it was putting all these pieces together, right? To me, it was one more piece in this puzzle that I was starting to build that showed that folks just were struggling to kind of be open and honest. And I think what's been really interesting for me since like 16 is if I look at where we are now, I feel like, or maybe it's me like wishful thinking, but I feel like there's the potential that there's a shift, right? Where I didn't grow up with spouses that were older than me and had been longer than me that were, it's not that they were, hiding, if you will, but there wasn't sort of this vulnerable conversation about what was hard necessarily. It wasn't just the norm that's what we were talking about. It was very much more the stiff upper lip sort of mentality. And I feel like we've made this very small but important turn where we're starting to recognize that doesn't really serve the marriage. It doesn't serve the spouse. It doesn't serve the family. And so folks are starting to kind of embrace the idea that it's okay to say that you're having a hard time. It's okay to find the services that you need, the support that you need. And it's okay to be a little more open and honest about that than I think, even 10 years ago, it was not as common as I think it's becoming. Again, I wouldn't say it's common yet, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I absolutely think it's better. And so I felt like that's part of Pride and Grit to me as well, as even though our focus and our audience is seasoned, I feel like it's also an opportunity to kind of show that just because your service member is continuing to excel in their career and taking on additional responsibilities, and you may end up in these roles where you're sort of, at the head of the table, quote unquote, right? But you can still be honest and you can still find a space for your own experience. And so my hope is that even younger spouses, even if they're not necessarily feeling like they're in our community, they're sort of watching that, right? And they're learning from that, and they're seeing that it's good to invest in yourself and to invest in your mental health and make sure that you're okay before you try to then pour into everyone else, or in conjunction with trying to pour into everyone else.
Well, and it sets them up to be prepared, because if they're younger or newer spouses, and if their spouse stays in, you're going to be at this point. So why not prepare now for what that's going to look like, and the tools you need in place to cope with that life, because it does change.
It does. Well, and that's been what's really interesting to me. I had started using language with like our kind of some of the stuff we were doing with Pride and Grit about what I was calling sort of the cumulative or the compounding impact of service, meaning that it's not, the second move. The second move, it's still fun. It's maybe the 12th move, right? Or the ninth move, or it's the fourth time you've had to give up the job you love because you're following your service member. And so it is not, sometimes it takes a while for these things to show up. And sometimes it's like flipping a switch for a lot of folks. For me, it was like that, where I was fine until I wasn't, right? I was good with all the changes, and I was happy to just sort of like, what does somebody call it? A friend of mine mentioned like the trailing spouse, right? I was comfortable with that role until I weren't. And I couldn't have anticipated when that moment would happen. But I hope that folks who sort of hit that moment overnight will find us as a place to kind of feel at home, to say, yep, I'm there. Yeah. I flipped my switch, and now I feel that weight. I feel that tiredness. And I need some support to help me kind of get through, because we're not done yet, but I'm getting a little bit tired, and I'm feeling that cumulative effect.
It's a weariness, I think, of you're on board, you're doing all the things, you support your spouse, you agree with the decisions being made. But, for us, we moved 6 times in 6 years. And I look back on that point, that was, later in his career, and I go, what in the world? Can I even string a sentence together? It's kind of remarkable what you go through, but you hit a point of, this is not normal. People don't live like this. And I have got to figure something out. And that was also a time in my life where I kind of shifted my career focus and really started working on some things that were important to me, because I knew if I didn't, I was not going to be okay, So I definitely, everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. As far as Pride and Grit goes, is it more of an online community? I know you have the retreat that we can talk about, but is it meetings? What would somebody, if they're hearing about this, like, yes, I want to be part of this, what would they expect?
Well, I think it's, it covers a couple different angles. So we have, like, as an example, we have blogs that folks will write. So some, I've contributed, other folks have contributed, that kind of tell their experience and their story with sort of different aspects of this little pocket of military life. So a lot of folks find that helpful to just, sometimes it's just necessary to sort of see yourself in someone else and realize, okay, it's okay that I feel that way. Someone else feels that way too. That's not something I need to hide. And that's not something I need to feel bad about. It's an okay experience for me. So finding yourself in some of those stories, I think, can be really helpful for folks. And that's a really passive way to just kind of learn and engage. And then you mentioned the retreats that we have. So one of the things that we had identified as kind of a cornerstone challenge for this sort of pocket of military spouses is around identity and around just being able to, one, kind of keep an identity that feels like your own in the midst of potentially being a parent and being a military spouse and being a volunteer or whatever else, you're taking on. But being able to also kind of retain that identity. So a lot of the work we've been doing over the last 18 months has really been kind of honoring that challenge and providing resources around it. So as you mentioned, we've done it twice now, an annual retreat that's really focused on those that are in kind of pre-transition, thinking about transition and wanting to kind of ready themselves for that process by way of really kind of sitting down and thinking about, what does my life look like? What do I want it to look like? Does it look like what I want? What is within my control and what isn't? And just helping folks really invest in themselves, because I think that's the thing that if we're not careful, all the elements of kind of being a solo parent, taking care of everything, all the things that spouses do can kind of be just the right conditions for you to not focus on yourself and not focus on your own development. And so it's not uncommon for folks to get to transition and particularly for career military spouses, get to that kind of line in the sand and go, oh, okay, I don't really know who I am or what I want, because I've just been sort of conforming, if you will, and just sort of molding into what was needed in the time and that duty station and that circumstance and that unit. And I haven't really been sort of standing in my own space and figuring out what I want and believing that those two things can coexist. Like, I think part of it is believing I can actually maintain that and I can actually sort of be in my own space. And yet I can still do these other things that I've been doing. It's just a matter of kind of how you invest in yourself in that way. So those events are how we're helping folks kind of address that and work through that. And right now, those are kind of the two big things that we're doing. We're kind of working on some other ideas for later in the year. So I'm hoping there will be some more things to announce to get the group engaging, because part of what I want that space to be is a place for community and a place for spouses to find other spouses. So whether it's engaging on, in our social media together and kind of going back and forth and talking through different challenges and learnings that they've had. So we do a lot of stuff about, tell us about how you handled this and that, because I think learning from each other is like the best way ever. Sure. Right. So, really it's the blogs. The other thing that we did do, they're a little older now, but they're still a lot of fun, is that I did a series of about 32 interviews with spouses from kind of, all walks of military life, but a lot in the seasoned pocket, and just sort of talked about how they got, how they're doing it, right? What does it look like to be doing this life well? And how are they sort of thriving in their season, and just using that as a way to learn from them. So that was actually a lot of fun. That I did that like a year and a half ago, but they're still up and they're still on our website. So there's a couple different ways to interact.
That's awesome. And it sounds like there's lots of good content for somebody that needs to just, like you said, not feel alone, and somebody else is going through this exact same thing. It's not just me. I'm not the weird one. Right?
Yeah. The feedback we hear all the time is that, what folks do appreciate is the fact that they can find people that are in that same place, and they can connect with people, or at least just understand that they're not alone in that, which is sometimes that's like half the battle, I think, to like normalizing how are you feeling?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Are the retreats in person, or are they virtual, or both?
So the first one we did was all virtual, because that was 2021. The second one we did this year was a hybrid, which was really interesting and different, and actually a lot of fun. So we had about a third of our audience in person here in DC. And then we had 2/3 of our audience virtual, but all like happening simultaneously. So it was essentially almost like a watch party for the in-person folks. But then when we would break into small groups to have discussion, they got to break together with people, they're sitting across from at a table, and which is the same thing the virtual folks did, but a virtual table. And so it was a lot of fun to kind of just see the differences in the two models. So we've been talking sort of behind the scenes about, what we think we want to do next and what that looks like. But so far we've been able to handle both. So we'll see.
Well, I'd love to hear any responses or stories from attendees how they felt about it or something that happened really positive from it.
Yeah. So the format for this event was a little different than last year's. Last year's was a little bit more about transition and just kind of getting people to start thinking about what is that going to look like? What is it going to look like for our marriage? What is it going to look like for our family? It was a little broader, if you will, topics last year for folks, which was, really interesting. And, we had really great feedback from last year's event. And based on last year's event and the feedback we got, one of the requests was folks really wanted to dig further into this identity topic. And so the whole first day, it was an 8-hour day, and the whole first day was 4 different speakers that really just kind of touched on different angles of identity. So we were able to kind of start off with, who are you now? Who were you before military life? What's changed? What do you want to keep? What do you not want to keep? Kind of getting you to think about that. And then we talked a lot about burnout, which was, I think, a really important topic for this particular audience, because we tend to kind of, many of us kind of give and give and give. And even if you're not sort of in that volunteer season, we're still just giving because we're likely just in a season of life that is asking a lot of us. We are often straddling older parents with older children, and things just are different. It's not better or worse, right? It's just different than when I had toddlers and and that was all I had to worry about. So, that whole burnout conversation, I think, was a really impactful one. And then we had a whole workshop on identity. And then we kind of wrapped up with one of my favorite folks is Brene Brown and her work. And so we had a Brene Brown facilitator, Dare to Lead facilitator, come in and talk about what I think is a really important thing for military spouses, which is the stories that we tell, and thinking about whether the stories that we're telling ourselves about a situation, whether they're sort of rooted in fact, right? So looking at our circumstances that we might find difficult and really being able to objectively evaluate, whether the version in our head sort of matches the reality, because sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes that doesn't serve us in terms of helping us move forward or not get stuck or whatever. So I don't think that answers your question, but anyway, that was, that was the format. But if I think about what my favorite part of the event, if I'm being honest, was actually day 2. So in day 2, we did a strengths workshop for spouses. So it was a 4-hour workshop that I led. And we did one last year as well, but I wasn't certified then. Someone else led that one. Corey Weathers, who I adore, led that one last year. But it was somewhat selfishly, it was the most fun I've had in such a long time. And it was this sort of for me, like this really affirming thing of, this is absolutely the work I'm meant to do. It was just so fun to do that with people, to get to see them have those light bulb moments of, right, this is the talent that I'm bringing to this situation. And this is why I'm showing up in this particular way. Because what that whole model does is it basically helps you identify your talents. They're rank ordered 1 to 34, and you start to understand how those talents really drive your behaviors. And so it was really fun to see people apply that to military life, apply that to parenting, apply that to, their marriage. Like you kind of can apply it everywhere. So that was, the most fun for me was that part. But I actually think for a lot of our attendees that came for that day, that was also the most impactful. Like there were a lot of folks that just had these huge aha moments of kind of understanding themselves in a way that was so different than how they had seen themselves before. It was such a perfect kind of pairing with this whole identity conversation. Because now they had this language for, okay, this is how I sort of lead in life. And these are the talents that I'm using. But am I doing that? Should I be doing more of that? Like just getting them to think about that was just really fun to watch. And I think a lot of really great learning from that.
That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. I did a lot of not that particular one, but there was like the True Colors one and then all these other kinds of things. Yep. And I found that I had been working in a space that was really not who I was, but I had grown into it, if that makes sense. Like I really thought I was like a heart forward, emotional person. really not. and, like the whole Enneagram thing too. Like, I just love these kinds of things where you can learn about yourself and starting to kind of peel back learned behaviors or things I'd had to adapt, if that makes any sense, over decades of military life, and a way of relating that necessarily wasn't really me. It was not that it was a facade, but it had adapted to certain things. And I thought I must be like an Enneagram 2 because I help people. And I was like, no, not at all. And that's not who I am. Like, I like to help people, but it was for a whole different motivation. So I don't know if that goes along with that at all, but
no,
I love that kind of thing. Yeah.
I love that, you've kind of embraced all of that, because I totally agree with you. I think they can really, particularly, and the reason I got into it was because I was kind of in a stuck season. I was feeling very stuck about kind of what was next for me. I'd given up working when we were stationed in Germany. And so it had been, not quite 6 years. About 6 years since I had really like had what I considered like a real job.
Yeah.
And I was working in my industry. And so I felt just very lost because I didn't know, do I go back to that? Do I not? The kids were old enough that it made sense for me to start looking into something like that. And that's how I found CliftonStrengths, was as a tool to help me kind of get unstuck. And boy, did it ever. Like, it not only got me unstuck, but then it like set me on this trajectory so my background's in training and development. So I've always wanted to find a way to merge that experience with military life. And it's like, nothing like the 11th hour to help me find it, but it's totally what's happened is now I've sort of found a way to blend those two.
Oh, girl, it's not the 11th hour yet. You're not there.
No, I know. No, I just made the 11th hour of sort of our military journey.
I know. It's funny because
I was just thinking of something you said. What I was going to say was, what I love about and you'll see this when you get into it, I'd love to get your feedback on it. But what I love about CliftonStrengths is that it's so nuanced. So the 1 to 34 actually gives you such detail because, if you think about, let's say Myers-Briggs, well, there's really like you got 4 different elements and that's it.
Right.
So it gives you 34 different ways to look at how you're responding. And so it's just, I find it so powerful as this kind of fundamental. And then I love sort of layering in all these other assessments because I think they all give you a slightly different picture of yourself, but I'm biased. It's totally my favorite.
I'll totally look into it. I love stuff like that. And I can totally resonate that whole feeling of, and I'm sure a lot of other spouses do too, of what am I going to do next? And we were stationed in Germany and I had been a nurse, and listeners know this. And then I had homeschooled for years and years and been out of the workforce because we were moving so much and he was deployed so much. And that it made sense. And I loved those years, but my oldest son we have 4 kids and he was about to graduate from high school. We were about to drop him off at college. We were leaving Germany to move to Hawaii. And I remember this moment. It was about 7 years before my husband's retirement. And at that point, we didn't know yet how long it was going to be. And I was listening to one of my favorite speakers, who was a homeschool speaker, Steve Lambert. And I was standing on a chair with a dish in my hand, taking stuff out of the cabinet to start kind of going through to pack up, for the movers to come. And he said, if you have not figured out, if your kids are graduating, you have not yet figured out what you're going to do at the next phase of your life. He's like, it's like a freight train coming. And I stood there, I thought, oh, what am I doing? And that's when I decided to go back to like writing programs and try to really beef up my freelance writing. And that was a big turning point for me. And that was kind of in relationship to kids growing up, and I think they kind of go hand in hand, I suppose. But it was definitely that moment of, what is this next phase of my life going to look at? This is not going to be all encompassing anymore, raising kids. And for military spouses, military life will come to an end. So I think this is just such an important conversation. That was a lot of commentary I think this is such an important conversation for spouses to be prepared for what's coming.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the things we learned through, the work that we've done is that one of the challenges that military spouses have, particularly those approaching transition. And part of the reason we do the work we do is we're trying to get spouses to think about what they want and who they are and kind of that next path way before their service member transitions. Because if you try to layer in empty nesting with a transition, with a spouse who's transitioning, it's a lot to put on a family. It's a lot to put on a marriage.
It is.
And so if we can get spouses to kind of do their work early, right? Like they, like, as we often do, right? They can be that foundation for what will be a future transition of a service member. They will have already done that work. They will have already kind of paved that path. And it's hard to find a downside to that. It feels like it's a win all around. But getting people to think about that sooner is sometimes hard, because I think it's like, oh, we're going to wait and our life's going to start after military. No, like it's not. It's not going to start now. You do, like, to your point, it's not going to start then. I mean, it can start then, but that might be a little bit harder, and it might be a much harder transition for you than if you can do a few small things along the way, whether it's before your kids are graduating or it's before you're transitioning, like whatever that big milestone that's coming, starting to think ahead about where do you want to be when that milestone hits, I think is really important work that I hope we're encouraging folks to do.
It sounds like it. Yeah. Yeah. If you're needing some inspiration in your life, take a listen to the Quest for New Inspiration podcast. We often find ourselves looking for positivity, especially with the way things are going in our world right now. Join KT Moschler on her quest to discover and share the stories of inspirational people. She shares stories that show us how we all have something impactful to share, and that your story might be the one that encourages someone else. This podcast promises to help motivate anyone who presses play, hoping to inspire them to put positive change into their own life and world. Join the Quest every other Friday, wherever you listen to podcasts, and get inspired. The Quest for New Inspiration podcast. Some of their recent episodes include upholding your life through your core values, finding your daily calm, taking your power back, and staying patient and trusting your journey. Here's to finding inspiration with the Quest for New Inspiration podcast. Well, I could talk to you all day, but I have just a couple more things I want to make sure and we cover. I think one of the things you mentioned when you had your miscarriage, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that, especially not having help or comfort really. But I think if you're a younger spouse or newer spouse, you look to leadership spouses, or you're at a ball or you're at a function and you see the spouses that have been around for a while and you just think they've got it together. You might be afraid to talk to them, or you might be afraid to approach them. So I don't know if you like to say seasoned spouses or salty spouses or experienced spouses, whatever, but what do you think is perhaps a big misconception that others may have about them? And on the flip side of that, what is something that maybe to encourage the more senior spouses, seasoned spouses, something that they are bringing to the table or they don't even realize about themselves? So we'll just take those one at a time. What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions, perhaps?
I think there's really two that come to mind. One is that we have all the answers, which we don't. Like we have it all figured out. We don't. And the other that comes to mind is that sometimes I think we sort of appear stronger than we are. Like, not to say we're not strong, right? We've obviously endured. But we struggle with the same things. I remember a story when we were in Germany. We were having an event at my house, and we were just like, we were all just kind of talking, and somehow it came out that, my husband and I would have these, like lighthearted, but still these debates, if you will, or these like quote unquote fights about laundry or whatever. It was like, don't do my laundry, don't, whatever. Yeah. He doesn't believe in separating, lights and darks. And I do, like that kind of thing. And it was, what I remember was just like so interesting to me is there was a younger spouse who was there, and she's like, oh, it makes me feel so much better to know that you guys have the same struggles we do. And I was like, well, of course we do. Like,
yeah, we still have to do laundry.
Right. Like it's the struggles are really the same. It isn't, the struggles don't go away just because you've been doing the life longer. The struggles just change. You might have had experience at it, but it doesn't, repetition doesn't breed ease. So just because you've done it more doesn't mean it's easier for you. And so to your earlier point, we sometimes need support too. And we can also offer a lot of perspective on, maybe how to weather a particular season that's hard.
And so to those seasoned spouses that are listening, what would you say to them as maybe they don't even realize about themselves that they have that's so incredible?
I think it is that I think what I love about seasoned spouses is their ability to have perspective. So because typically, right, if we consider a seasoned spouse as someone who has been in for a while, has done this life for a while, right? You've seen a lot. And so I think what is great about having repetition is it does, I think, enhance your perspective. So you can take a situation and be able to sort of just take it at face value and not really see it for much more than that because you've been down this road before. And so, it doesn't bother you that, your spouse isn't home for dinner at a certain time, or there's certain things that just sort of roll off for you because you've had that experience and you've had that time to get to that place. You didn't start there. Nobody does. But over time, right, you develop these mechanisms to help you kind of keep your own peace, keep the family's peace, and keep everything, level while you're navigating, up tempo in military life. So I think sometimes we underestimate all that experience and what that does for us and how we handle it, but also the value that experience could have for others if we chose to share it.
Wow. That's so good. And I'm just thinking of the seasoned spouse that's maybe listening right now and feels very alone and feels isolated and maybe is just not sure that they can keep doing this. It's just gotten really hard. And what advice or ideas would you have for somebody that's in that spot right now that's listening?
I think one thing is just acknowledgement that's okay. Like it's okay if you're in a place where you're just tired. Like there isn't a single seasoned spouse. Maybe there is one. I've never met them, but that doesn't have that. It hasn't gotten there. Who hasn't, been in that place where they didn't love this duty station, or they didn't love this unit, or they didn't love this aspect, and they're just tired and they're ready to move on and they're ready to put their own career first, or whatever the case might be. I get it. We've all, so many of us have been there. So first, I think it's just to recognize that you're not alone and acknowledge that that's okay. And it's okay if you're not sort of feeling okay with all of that. But in terms of how to move through it, I think the moving through it part is so important. For me, what is most helpful is my spouse. So for me, it is being able to have honest communication with my spouse about where I am, what I need, where I'm struggling, so that to the extent he's able, he can help sort of fill the gaps and give me a little reprieve, if you will, if that's needed. So I think if you don't have that communication, learning to develop that or practicing the development of that, I think can be really helpful and important to feel like you have a partner in kind of your own experience. But I also think it's reaching out to other spouses. If I learned anything from my experience with my miscarriage, is that there's, no one was going to judge me for needing help. No one was going to do anything but wrap their arms around me. And I essentially took away the opportunity for them to do that because I was afraid of, I was afraid of being judged, or I was afraid of, I don't know what I was afraid of, but I know there was a fear there. And in the end, there were plenty of amazing people that would have wrapped their arms around me, and I never gave them the chance because I was too afraid of probably perception, probably whatever would have come. And in the end, that didn't serve either of us. They didn't get to do what they're best at, and I didn't get to be the beneficiary of that.
Yeah.
So I think raising your hand is the most important thing. It's hard, and acknowledging that it's hard is important, but it really does make a difference. And so just keep raising your hand and you'll find people who want to wrap their arms around you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a fear of admitting you need help. I don't know why we do that.
I know. It's so frustrating.
I look back, I can think of all the times I did that and it was to my detriment. And you don't get a prize for, white knuckling it through and not asking for help or admitting you can't do this. It's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and saying in some ways the fact that you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? Even
True.
if you can, even if you're that like, even if you are so capable of weathering all of this that you never need anyone. Okay, that's great. But what if you pulled people along with you? Like, how could that experience transform if you were able to do it with someone standing shoulder to shoulder with you? How would that, could it make it more fun? Could it make it easier? Probably. So I think sometimes just because we can doesn't mean we should.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Well, those are good words. And I know that they are going to be so helpful to listeners. And whether you are at the end of your service member's career or you see it off in the distance, it's coming, and prepare and get yourself ready because it's going to change everything. And I think what you're doing is so important, Jen. And I just love this community that you've built and these retreats. I think they just have filled a need that's obviously there for so many people. So what is coming for you in Pride and Grit in the near future, if you can share anything?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, we're still we're still trying to kind of figure out what's next for us and what the community needs, frankly, because it's really about, what they need and kind of filling that. There's definitely more strengths work because frankly, that's what's fun for me. So I'm leaning into the things that I am good at, and I know that I'm good at that. So doing more strengths work in this space is something that I want to find funding for, and I want to do more of. The other thing I want to really start doing more of is our stories and just telling more of them. So that's something I think we're going to be emphasizing more this year, is pulling those stories in and being able to share them so that we just have a bigger kind of bank of things to pull from when people are in a season where they need that support.
Well, I love it. Well, thank you again so much for coming on today and sharing all about what you're doing with Pride and Grit and your experiences. I know they're going to help someone.
Thank you, Jen. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Awesome. And everybody go take a look at her website and Jen's social media. We'll link it in the show notes and connect with her and share this great resource with other spouses that you may know. I think you guys will really enjoy connecting with her and benefiting from all this great wisdom. So in the meantime, thanks everybody for listening. I hope you're doing great wherever in the world this finds you. And just remember, you are brave, you are strong, and you have got this. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Milspouse Matters podcast. Connect with me at jen-mcdonald.com, where you can find a free deployment devotional and other resources, or on social media as @MilspouseMatters. You can find my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, on Amazon and other booksellers. Love the show? Please leave a 5-star review in whatever podcast player you're listening, and then share it with someone else who could use it too. Until next time, remember, you are brave, you are strong, and you've got this.